Today we're taking a deeper look into the technologies that are available to use in reaching net zero and energy security as well. Security that was jeopardized, of course, by Russia's war in Ukraine. In particular, we're going to look at the role that wind and nuclear energy can play in keeping the lights on. Joining me to discuss this important issue is Dale Vince, a green industrialist and owner of Ecotricity, which says it's Britain's greenest energy supplier, supplying electricity from wind and solar. Welcome to the show, Dale.
Thanks very much. Happy to be here.
Also, Lincoln Hill, who's Policy Director at the UK's Nuclear Industry Association. Welcome to the show, Lincoln.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
How do you pronounce nuclear?
Nuclear. You don't want to tempt me with any kind of George W. kind of nuclear. Try to say nuclear.
Also, Ben Cook, the editor of the Times Earth Supplements, who's actually bothered to come into the studio, Lincoln and Dale. Welcome, Ben.
Wow.
It's good to be here.
So let's start by taking your views. I mean, I spoke to Emma Pinchbeck, the Chief Executive of Energy UK yesterday, and my God, she filled me with optimism. She said we're well on course to basically be getting most of our energy from renewables in the next sort of 10 or so years. Dale, you're running this amazing wind power company. Tell us all about it. Do you think that's kind of achievable?
Yeah, I do. You mentioned at the start of the show that somebody said we have the technology we need, and that's the kind of central plank of what I'm always saying to people. We have all of the technology in renewable energy and in the smart grid that we need to get to 100% green energy. We actually have enough wind and sun to power the country 10 times over, so we have the resource, and we only need to use 1% of the UK's land mass to achieve that. So we have the room as well. And economically, we need no public money to do this. So that's a perfect combination, right?
Totally. I mean, why aren't we doing it then? I mean, it sounds amazing. And presumably some of that wind can be offshore as well.
Yeah, and already quite a lot of it is offshore because the Conservatives banned onshore wind about 10 years ago. We'd have had twice as much of that now as if they hadn't done. We'd have had 20% of our electricity right now from onshore wind instead of 10%. And we'd have taken £10 billion in that period from our nation's energy bill. So why are we not doing it at the moment? I think it's ideology. I think Cameron banned onshore wind due to Tory ideology, and Sunak is continuing in that vein now. He's intending to fight the next election with an anti-green stance. And that's really harmful to us because it adds to our energy bills and detracts, of course, from net zero, which is fundamentally important to us.
Well, Lincoln, let's talk to you about nuclear power. I mean, the nuclear debate is very interesting because obviously France has this great environmental lead, if you like, by having so much nuclear power. We have these, what appear to me, the layman, you can obviously knock me back on this, these enormous white elephants of 3 new nuclear power stations, which appear to be costing billions of pounds and taking years to build. And this debate also about what are called modular nuclear reactors, which are the kind of smaller, almost kind of DIY, a bit like the nuclear reactor you'd have in a nuclear submarine. What's going on with nuclear in this country?
Well, what we've done is we're basically correcting mistakes that we made in the past, where we stopped building nuclear. And that's really the most damaging thing you can do, because then you lose the expertise, you lose the workforce, you lose the project management expertise to get projects done more quickly and efficiently. So Hinkley and Sizewell are absolutely essential, and they are going to be cornerstones of our energy security, of our net zero journey, not just in the near future, but for the rest of the century, as well as creating the green jobs that we need. And that's an absolutely essential revival, because if you look at, you mentioned France, who does it best in terms of clean power? They have the mix. They have everybody. Wind, solar, nuclear, all working together to decarbonize. And you mentioned small modular reactors. I wouldn't describe them as DIY. They'll still be pretty significant civil infrastructure projects to execute. But what you need is, if you have some sites that can take big reactors, you have some sites that can take small reactors, you want to be able to make optimal use of both. Introduce modular methods of construction to try and increase the efficiency, which they're already doing at Hinkley Point C, and it's something which you can do for large and small alike. So you really need a mix of nuclear technologies as well as a mix of green technologies. And the key really is you have to apply the lessons that we know work around the world to build nuclear faster and cheaper, which is never stop building, keep your expertise fresh, your workforce active, get your design, and for God's sake, replicate it. You got to keep replicating.
Yeah, exactly. And we seem to have reinvented the nuclear power station with places like Sizewell, where the costs have kind of ballooned to almost £40 billion. Why is it taking so long, and why is it so expensive?
Well, there are a couple of things in that it'll be much cheaper than the alternative, which is trying to build a grid that doesn't have nuclear, where you constantly have to rely on gas backup or ballooning transmission and balancing costs for a grid that doesn't have the underpinning stability of nuclear. So it is a unique and irreplaceable technology, clean, reliable, sovereign, all in one. But what we've done is we've had to take on the chin at Hinkley and Sizewell the cost of reactivating a new nuclear industry that essentially didn't exist in this country.
Yes.
We took 20 years off. You take 20 years off, you're not going to have the workforce that you need, and it's going to take time and it's going to take money to reactivate it. And the other problem, you made a reference to it, is we've insisted in the UK, and Hinkley's again had to take this on the chin, on UK-specific design changes that make it hard to take the lessons.
Crazy. Why do we keep doing this nonsense? We do it with defence procurement as well.
And I think it's something we need to sort out, because there's nothing that we know about nuclear operations or safety that our other trusted partners in France, the US, Canada, Japan, Korea, others don't know. So we should take designs, standardize them, take the lessons, build them, repeat them. And that works. That's worked for wind. Wind had costs of 150 pounds a megawatt hour. They brought those right down.
Okay, Ben Cook, who's the editor of the Times Earth Supplements, you're the sort of neutral referee here, because obviously you've heard Lincoln, who is passionate about the Nuclear Industry Association, nuclear industry, nothing wrong with that. Dale, passionate about wind energy and solar. What is your take? You do this every day. You talk to everyone. What is your take on our move towards net zero, and I think the added benefit of energy security?
Well, I think that all experts are in agreement that our future energy system will rely largely on renewables, and most of those renewables will be offshore wind, although we'll also have a lot of onshore wind. Well, if Labour
win.
Well, if Labour win, indeed, and allow companies to get on and construct onshore wind turbines. And we'll have some solar too, although really the debate is over how we provide the reliable power, which we can switch on even when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And as Lincoln says, that may well largely be nuclear, although there are other options as well. So Chris Llewellyn-Smith of Oxford University actually did a study that showed that the cheapest way to provide that reliable, clean power for when the wind isn't blowing would actually be to use excess renewable energy when there's lots of it to drive these machines called electrolyzers, which actually split hydrogen out of water. And then hydrogen is a clean fuel which you can burn in a power station when the wind isn't blowing and when the sun isn't shining. And so while the government is heavily investing in nuclear energy to provide that clean baseload power, there are other options as well.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to turn to those in a moment, but I want to go back to Dale Vince, because Dale, you very kindly sent me a copy of your book. I think you sent it to all members of the House of Lords because you understand where the real power lies in this country. And I just want to talk to you about the politics of net zero, because I am fascinated. For me, it has always been a complete no-brainer. You invest in renewables, you help combat climate change, and most importantly, for people on the right, I always say, and you give yourself energy security. Why would you not want that? And yet we're always told, we're wasting our money, and China's building 55 coal stations a day, so it's a pointless exercise. Perhaps you could address the consumer cost issue, because that is the most robust argument, if you like, for the people who kind of are opposed to net zero. They just say for the gain, the cost is completely out of kilter.
Yeah, and I don't understand that. You're right. People do say that. People do also say, what about China? And that is a really kind of fallacious argument. It's an excuse, really, to do nothing. China has more renewable energy now as a percentage of their country than we do. And that's a country of over 1 billion people. So, China are doing great things. But look, onshore wind and sun need no public money, right? So the cost is zero. The economic gain is fantastic. If you take £1 and you invest it in fossil fuels or renewable energy, you get twice the jobs and twice the GDP growth if you invest in renewable energy. You mentioned a study that shows that we can use excess renewable energy to make hydrogen. That's well known that we can do that. And that's how we get to have a grid running 100% on renewable energy. The national grid says that we can run the grid 100% on renewable energy. We don't need nuclear. The most expensive form of electricity we've ever had. It's always a decade or two behind budget and tens of billions over budget. And the world reached peak uranium some years ago. So more uranium is being used now in the world than is being mined. We're eating into stocks. Britain has no uranium. And so right now, we're dependent on global fossil fuel markets to set the price and supply fossil fuels to our country. If we had a major shift into nuclear power, we would be dependent on global markets for uranium, and those markets are already chronically short of uranium. By 2050, there won't be enough to go around.
But
everybody builds what everybody's planning.
You'd agree with the thesis that seems to unite everyone is there needs to be a mix of carbon-free energy, and that can be a mix of solar, wind, nuclear, hydrogen, all sorts.
No, I disagree, actually. I don't think that we need new nuclear in the mix. I think we should use what we have as we transition into 100% renewable energy. We have other technologies as well on the renewable side that are genuinely clean, because we mustn't overlook the nuclear waste that has to be dealt with over periods of thousands of years. Genuinely clean options like tidal lagoons, for example. These are built offshore. They impound a body of water. They generate twice on a moving tide. They happen several times a day. We can build them up the west coast of our country and actually provide energy in a far more predictable way than from the wind and the sun, and in a constant pattern as well, because the tides move up and down our country. There's enough resource out there to provide a third of the power that we need. We can store the water, a bit like pump storage, for not very long periods of time, for a couple of hours, and then let it out when we're ready. So we've got a degree of controllability with tidal lagoons, and the cost is far lower than nuclear.
Okay, let me bring Lincoln Hill in to answer your challenge, Dale. Lincoln, you're out of date. And also, there is actually that point about nuclear waste, which I'd forgotten, the saga when John Gummer was the Environment Secretary, of trying to build a deep mine to store nuclear waste in. And of course, the astronomical cost of dealing with the nuclear waste in Sellafield.
So on the waste disposal, it's more about the way we've approached infrastructure in this country. Finns have built a repository for their nuclear waste, which is very low in volume. They've done it. It's about to be operational. So it can be done. We just need to learn the lessons. But to respond to some of the things that Dale's raised, nuclear is quite a competitive form of electricity generation. It's gas, imported gas. That's the most expensive form of power generation we've ever had, as the crisis over the last 2 years has proven. On uranium, the UK actually has 110,000 tons stockpiled. We use about 1,000 tons equivalent every year. So if we needed to, we could use that stockpile. And on uranium, there are quite 25, 30 years worth of known unexploited uranium mines. We use 50 to 60,000 tons a year. That's by far the lowest mining requirement of any sector. And if I could step back, there isn't really anybody that's having the debate that Dale is kind of implying we should have. If you look all around the world, people are saying we need renewables, we need nuclear, we need all the solutions that Dale is talking about and more. Let's not try to use any innovation to push out a workable, proven...
And talking of other innovations, Ben Cook, let's end with you. I'd love to... You are the sort of expert on heat pumps. Heat pumps is another issue that drives me round the bend, because I keep wanting somebody to start the sort of car phone warehouse of eco-tricity, if you like, eco things, because, someone like me would be quite interested in getting a heat pump if I could just go down the shop, have someone tell me why it's better than having a oil boiler or a gas-fired boiler, and have one installed. What's the problem with getting heat pumps to be mainstream, and are they all they are cracked up to be?
Well, you're right. We do have a problem getting heat pumps into the mainstream. Heat pumps are going to be the main technology the government intends to use to decarbonise how we heat our homes. And the government would like to be installing 600,000 a year by 2028. Whereas this year, we're forecast to install only 80,000. So there's a real gap which has to be surmounted there. And the reason for that gap is largely because heat pumps have a high upfront cost, even with the government's subsidy. They can cost £5,000 to £10,000, which is a lot more than, say, £2,000 or £3,000 for a gas boiler. Although then over time, a well-installed heat pump is actually going to start saving people money in its lower running costs. And so really the challenge is how to balance out that high upfront cost. And there are lots of different companies trying to do this. One that I wrote about a couple of weeks ago was called Era, which is actually offering to install a heat pump for no upfront cost. Homeowners would pay about £80 a month, and they would pay off the upfront cost over 10 or 15 years instead. And all the time they would still be saving money compared to a gas boiler because the running costs would be lower. So that's one way to get around that cost. I suppose the other thing to say is that just as we deploy more of these things, we will learn how to install them more cheaply. And so while that high upfront cost is a difficulty now, it is expected to become less of a difficulty over time. Another problem people have with heat pumps is that often it requires planning permission to build one.
Crazy.
Exactly. And so that's another obstacle we need to surmount.
Just insane. But anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed this